Welcome to Leadership from the Heart, the podcast that dives deep into the world of operational focused leadership. I'm your host, Romie, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on the journey of discovery, growth, and transformation. In each episode, we'll explore the essential principles of effective leadership that not only drive results, but also touch the very core of the human connection. At Leadership from the Heart, we believe that leadership is more than just a title. It's a commitment to inspire, empower, and guide with authenticity and compassion. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Leadership from the Heart. I have a special guest today, Stephanie Crain. She's a corporate mystic, a master Jungian leadership coach, and a mindset specialist. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Romie. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Excited to have you. I'm very excited about the topics that you want to talk about today, and just kind of flow and let whatever comes come. So to kick it off, tell me a little bit about your journey and how you got started in the leadership space, leadership and healing space.
Yeah. So it's interesting because those are two sort of like divergent journeys that intersected each other in my life. And for me, I have what I like to call a complicated medical past. And it started with birth, literally. And so I had to go on sort of a medical journey of my own where I had to learn a lot about claiming personal agency and really self-healing and not being dependent on other people to heal me. And because I was a child that had a lot of medical issues, there was sort of a conditioning that happened that I had to unlearn as an adult. And so through that, I experienced trauma and had to go on a healing journey of just, taking care of myself.
Right.
And so I learned a lot in that process, and also started to, do things like train myself in yoga and train myself in mindfulness practices and try to move away from so many of the just immediate, like Western medicine does a wonderful job of healing us when we need like an emergency healing, but not so good on the long-term care when, it's sort of that process for me. And so really it was a goal of personal agency. And, from a leadership perspective, I feel like leadership is something that was I was sort of born into a space of, I was raised by a true leader, a true corporate leader. I was put in positions very early on that allowed me to express leadership and also allowed me to like sort of test and flex leadership and learn a lot of very difficult lessons at an early age. And, I think the process of my own self-healing and dealing with my own traumas, and then also my real strong desire to like just be very tenacious and dynamic and passionate about the things that I did, they converged into me wanting to heal environments and do that from a leadership space, do that from a place of guidance and more servant-based leadership, I guess, helping to empower other people and
Right.
give them the type of agency that I sought for myself, but for almost totally different reasons, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, a lot of sense. And so going back to like how you had to like deprogram, what are some of the things that you had to like deprogram in your healing journey, maybe at the same time or prior to the leadership part?
Huh. Well, I think the first and biggest thing is that I mean, always come back to that word of like personal agency, because for me, personal agency it also means accountability. And in the medical world, there's sort of this thing, I think it's shifted a lot, but especially, at the time that I was growing up and throughout those years, there was very much the doctor is God and what the doctor says goes, and here, take this pill and don't ask questions and, do these things. And I've had somewhere between 20 and 25 surgeries. I've I've had a lot of medical experiences, including an NDE, which is a near-death experience. And so I've had some very complex medical experiences in my life. And the deprogramming was like the recognition, again, that nobody was going to be more responsible for my health and my personal growth than me. That I couldn't just turn to a doctor and say, hey, fix this.
Right.
And then also, I wasn't broken. I wasn't, I have like, I don't identify with sort of my health. I often say like, I might manage something, I might manage chronic pain, but I do not have chronic pain. Like, this is something that I do not claim that or own it. And so it's that's that mindset aspect of like, so another deprogramming, I'm not a victim.
Right.
Like, there's nothing here to feel sorry for. God, please don't put that pressure upon me of, it's like, it's a space where I'm not a victim. These are experiences I've had. I have a lot of gratitude for the experiences in my life. I've learned a lot of things from them.
Right.
I might not, wish them upon somebody, but I also wouldn't necessarily want somebody else's experiences either. So, I sort of look at it like these were the gifts that were given to me, and they're mine to work with.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's, I think, a lot of the programming. So when you come into the corporate space, there's a lot of conditioning that brings us into the corporate space.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, I think in some ways depletes our own agency. A lot of people, I find, feel somewhat disempowered in corporate environments. And, so a lot of what I talk about with people is, how do we empower everybody in a corporate environment? I go on the premise that everybody in a corporate environment is an employee, regardless of your title or status. You are reporting to someone, even if you're the owner and you report to your customer. You are an employee.
Oh.
You are working for somebody. And so to have any other mindset in that space, or to at least not honor the employee experience, is to sort of not recognize the value of the human experience in a corporate setting. And so, yes.
Very different way of definitely a paradigm shift for me, different way of thinking about it. Even the CEO, the founder, has a customer that he or she reports to, and that's very humbling. What do you think? Do you think that people have an issue with, when it comes to leadership and owning their own agency and having their own autonomy? Do you think that it's more programming from the past, or do you think that it is something that's currently still very much existent in corporate America?
Both. I think that it's both. I think we're in I think actually we're in a really strong transition period right now. And we've been, and I have another podcast, and we recently had a conversation around the history of HR, and and my co-host did this incredible research and came up with like 400 years of HR history. But we identify that right now we're in what is called the high performance period. And this has been happening since around the early 90s. We entered into the high performance period. And when we think about what high performance really truly looks like, it's not burning your team out, right? It's not like working people like past their point of, production and, just being in this space. And so I think that we've been working towards this shift for a while of really wanting to express high performance, but not fully knowing how. I think we've adopted a lot of leadership styles from places where they're very valuable, such as, I sometimes use the example of, military leadership, or leadership where it is life and death, mission critical, and you do have to be responsive in a certain way. But in those environments, people are trained towards that responsiveness, but nobody in a marketing department has been conditioned that they're not going to die when their marketing piece doesn't go out, but that's how we ask them to live. Right. And it's just simply not sustainable for everybody to be functioning in survival mode when they really haven't been given the skills to manage those types of like high stress emotions. And so I think leaders right now, we still have that like crossover where we're still using old methods, but those old methods are working against us because we're seeing massive loss in productivity. We're seeing, quiet quitting, mass churn, the gig economy where people are just saying, hey, I'll do it myself. Like all sorts of things are happening that are going to force corporations to have to look at the way that they lead the humans in their organizations differently.
Absolutely. Not to mention, we noticeably see the union getting stronger and stronger in, protection of the employee just because of how much we've required output from the employee. So 100% agree with you on everything you just said there. Um, Talk to me about organizational shadow work. I'm so interested in that topic.
Thank you. Yeah. So me too. And it's something that I don't want to like claim to be the person that made it up, but I think I might be. Um, you
I
know,
think
it, the idea of shadow work comes from Carl Jung and Jungian psychology. And as you know, I'm a master Jungian coach. And the shadow is we're really working with our psyche and our ego, our unconscious mind. The shadow really represents what is unseen. And for
Mhm.
an individual, it often represents behaviors that we've been conditioned to set aside because they just simply, we were taught at a very early age, they do not work for us. There can be very good things in the shadow, like your voice, for example, might be put into the shadow. You might not speak up for yourself. And so, there are things that what lives in the shadow are things that for whatever reason we have just been taught, like, don't do this, don't get angry, don't speak too loud, don't do these things. Um, I took this analogy that applies to individuals and applied it to corporations and the ideal that I believe that organizations sort of develop and create their own shadows. And for many years, they've done things to attempt to maybe market their way out of it or recruit their way out of it. Or, they use sort of like what I call departmental solutions to try to solve business problems that are really truly leadership issues that need to be addressed at a shadow level, at a core, like let's get into the depth of what we're not saying. And so in a corporate world, it's not so much what's not seen as what's not said, what we're not willing to speak to, and what we're trying to hide, what we, are hoping that we can glaze over, and the customer hopefully isn't going to notice that dysfunction or that stress that's happening inside the background. And in my space, I just want to illuminate that and shine lights on those shadows, because I think that those are the things that allow toxic cycles to develop inside companies and allow companies to ultimately get stuck and even fail.
Yeah, and so you said like almost deliberately overlooking. In your experience, is it they're overlooking because obviously they don't want to see it because they don't want to have to address it? Or do you think some executives actually don't even know that it is that deep conditioning that they have going on?
I think it's both and more.
Mm.
And so I'll give you a couple of examples where I think these are just sort of anecdotal examples. You have let's like you have a startup group, for example, and maybe you have three people that have been working together to develop their startup, and they know each other's idiosyncrasies. They've learned to tolerate each other in whatever ways. They haven't necessarily done leadership work. They haven't really done the work to sort of like but all of a sudden they're funded, and now they're going to go from being like this team of 3 to a team of 25.
Right.
And so this is an example where I would say I would love to work with this team to help them avoid creating that shadow. Because as they making that transition from, hey, we're just this tight knit group that understands each other, to all of a sudden now we've got people that we have to manage, people that we're responsible for, and we have to be able to lead, guide these people, and in some ways, get them to produce for us, and hopefully have it be an environment that's going to be productive for the individual as well, right? Like ideally, that's what you want. You want to start a company that's going to work. So that's
Right.
like one way where I think like a shadow could get developed without the leaders really understanding that it's even happening.
Okay.
But then I'm gonna go swing all the way to the extreme And let's just talk about a very public shadow right now. Let's talk about Boeing. Because Boeing, we are watching the exposure and illumination of a decades long shadow that has been happening before our eyes, right? But if you go to Boeing's website, they still have engineering excellence as one of their stated, documented values. But it's really, really clear that they have not been living up to and expressing that value. And there are a lot of shadow elements that have been uncovered while various organizations and people have been investigating what has actually been going on behind the scenes at Boeing. And so that's an example where I believe there's some complicity. I believe that the leadership in many ways, directed that shadow. There was Boeing was a organization for 80 or so years before they merged with another organization. Leadership changed, and when that happened, culture changed. Leadership drives culture.
Exactly, and profits seem to be, the most important thing instead of quality of output, and it's.
I call it stepping over dollars to pick up dimes, because this is going to cost them an enormous amount of money. And, and honestly, I mean, they're being investigated by the DOJ. It really is something that expands beyond, what you just have to look at, like, when, they're not, and what's frustrating with Boeing is they're not just damaging their own brand. They're actually hurting the public. They're damaging an industry, the brand of an entire industry, right? So the accountability is exponential. And, it's like, that's obviously an incredibly extreme example, but it's something that's very, very real, because it's taken decades for this to occur. This didn't happen overnight. And if these shadows had been illuminated very early on and addressed by the board, addressed in the proper ways, they may have taken a different path. The journey may have been different.
Right. Yeah, I call it like avoidant leadership. Like, it's just where they don't want to see it, and eventually it becomes too big to not see, and now we've got to deal with all the consequences of not dealing with it early on. Do you find that obviously whistleblowers, people that work, they do bring it up, nothing's said, and so it almost has to get this big for it to crumble? And so probably a lot of employees there just shrug their shoulders and let, so to say, the shit hit the fan so that we could get here.
It's interesting, because I have a post right now out that I've run a couple of times, and it's just 10 questions to ask in a one-on-one, right? It's nothing like super revelationary or anything like that. But there's a comment on there that I've left on there, and I've just watched how many likes it gets. And the comment is simply, "I wish I still cared."
Oof.
And that's, I mean, employees and humans as in general, like, if we want to just start with Maslow's hierarchy, okay, we're not fulfilling even our basic needs. Okay. And to think that, we're wanting, this like high performance, we're wanting this high functioning, high profit, all the, but it's got to serve holistically. And there is a sustainability breakpoint. Like that is the truth. So I think when people just literally stop caring, and you just have people showing up and they don't feel like they're being heard, and they don't feel like it, they feel like not only do they not feel like they're being heard, but that if they say something, they're going to be, called out or worse.
Right.
And I think, from my perspective, there's nothing more valuable to me than feedback. And I mean, a negative, positive, I love me, hate me, don't ignore me.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me something, right? Like, love me, hate me, don't ignore me. I mean, give me feedback. I can work with that.
I try to tell leaders that all the time. I said, the moment they stop talking, you've got a problem, because it means that they don't care anymore.
Absolutely.
So get them to talk. I don't care how big or how small it is. Get them to say something, because no news is not good news anymore.
I would even say it means that they can't care anymore.
Correct. Right.
Right. And so it's not even, they don't want, I mean, people want to be engaged. People want to feel valued and purposeful. Nobody wants to feel like they are just wasting hours and hours of their time for purpose they don't understand. One of the things I tell leaders, and that one of the best and most powerful things you can do is help your employee understand the direct impact they have on the
Yes.
business, on the customer. Like I don't care how far removed they are from that process, or how, whatever minuscule or small their role seems in the environment. It does not matter. It has a significant value in the culture, and it has significant value for them to understand that.
Yeah.
And if somebody doesn't have value in the environment, they simply shouldn't be there. And,
Sure.
like it should be that easy of a decision. Otherwise, if they're valuable, then they need to know that.
Right. So let's say you were hired by Boeing, and they wanted to, I'm calling out for you. They wanted you to come in and illuminate some of those shadows. What would you do first?
That's a really good question. I do believe, and I really actually do believe this, that there are some things that can't really be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in reality, some of the key people involved in, leadership have already left Boeing. So the people that I would need to, really work with and address in that moment, they've already chosen to step out of that process. So the first thing I would do would be observe.
Mm-hmm.
I would ask questions. I would try to determine if there was an opportunity or a possibility to really transition that culture, because with Boeing and an organization of that size, it's you're talking about turning the Titanic, right? And that didn't really work out for the Titanic. I mean, there wasn't enough time. And so it's like, how much energy and time can you put into shifting a culture that is spent? Again, Boeing is a 100-year-old company, but what's been happening has only been happening since the early, mid 90s.
Right.
Or so,
Right.
So this has been something that's been going on for decades, but not. I mean, the bulk of the company existed expressing those values that they have on their website. They
Right.
did actually live up to the values that they expressed. I always tell people, like, if you're in a marriage, for example, and how long is it going to take to get over a bad breakup? And I always say, like, the half-life of the existence of I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't know if I honestly, like, I would look at Boeing and be like, I'm not sure if I want to try to fix Boeing. I would rather try to help companies avoid ever becoming a Boeing.
Ah, I see you. Okay.
Like, that's a lot of energy for me to try to put into fixing Boeing. And I have to
Sure.
look at so I know that, people are motivated by compensation, and compensation's important, but I have, felt like I sold my soul and ended up spending a lot of money on medical bills and therapy and all
Right.
sorts of things. And so there is a cost value reward to compensation. And I don't know if you could pay me enough money to want to work with Boeing, to just take on that negative energy into my life. I have boundaries, and I care
Yeah.
about that. But maybe I would be on a
I
team. Maybe I would be a part of a
Sure.
team that would go
Sure.
in, where I felt supported in that way. And there were maybe therapists and psychologists and, like, other people that were involved, because I am not those things. And I feel like the issues at Boeing at that level, I actually think they're pretty, they're pretty, like, toxic. They're pretty bad, like, in that sense. So
Yeah, I find that changing a culture often involves a lot more therapeutic modalities than it does just a good leader coming in and changing over. Because I used to joke about it, but it's almost like domestic violence, and so
I don't think
it's,
that's a joke.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not. I've
I think that,
realized.
yeah, I think that's
I've realized
accurate.
in time
Yeah.
it's very accurate. They have been beat down for so long that they don't even know, to your point, how to say what they need to say, or they're afraid, and those are almost the worst cases. So I totally respect your view on Boeing, for
Yeah.
sure.
For me, I mean, and to answer your question more directly, like, what type of company, like, to me, when the company expands beyond around 500 to 1,000 people, it starts to become, it's better to almost work interdepartmentally and
Correct.
work with, like, department leaders, and, like, kind of structure work within the culture itself, because at a certain size it becomes, to your point, difficult, to, like, really adjust that culture. And so
Right.
I prefer to work with like small to medium-sized businesses or individual leaders that are coming to me with, their own teams and trying to elevate their own leadership process.
Right. Right. What is like the number one reason somebody comes to you for leadership coaching?
It's interesting because people come to me for leadership coaching for a lot of reasons, and it doesn't really matter why they're coming to me. I am always working with them on the same issue, and that is helping to raise their emotional responsiveness, helping to raise their own emotional awareness of how they're showing up and what energy they may be projecting or bringing to the situation, and then helping them to develop stronger intuition so that they can better read energy and communicate better with the people that are around them. And so there can be a whole, people come to me because they're people pleasers and they're stuck and they can't set boundaries. People come to me because they're angry all the time and they don't know how to stop being angry all the time. People come to me because they stayed in the same job that they knew they wanted to quit 7 years ago. And now they literally don't know what to do, but they know they can't be at that job anymore, and they're high level positions, that people come to me because they get stuck.
Right.
That's really functioning. Whatever is causing them to get stuck, it's something that has been working for them, and suddenly it's just starting to work against them. And they're not able to really expand the way that they want to. They're not able to get the outcomes or, the sort of response that they're looking for in a leadership space. And they find themselves being triggered more than they're being, effective in that sense.
And so you're basically just helping them to be their authentic self.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And let's dive into that. Let's talk about what that, are you adding to the person or are you removing some programming? A little bit of both, I would assume.
I don't like to think of removing as much as integrating. I think that everything we have is there for us to use. I do talk a little bit about unlearning and repatterning, reconditioning, so to speak. A lot of the patterns and things that we develop start pre-verbal so early, right? That, but they get layered onto. And I talk a lot about value activation because we sort of take on the values of like everyone around us. And I think, a lot of times when I ask people, like, how do you know, like what's really important to you, what you value? A lot of times they'll say like when somebody really, pisses me off, when somebody crosses that value, it's like, oh no, that's important. No, don't do that. And it's like, but and so that's reactive, right? You're being reactive. So how do you proactively activate your values? How do you show up for your values? Right. And how do you even know if they're yours? And I talk also about values are different than principles in the way that I describe them. So a principle is something that you would die for. Okay. And really, frankly, most people don't have that many of them because we're not all out dying for everything, but we have some. We all have something that we're like, yeah, I would like fight or die for that. But a value is negotiable. What you value when you're 20 is different than what you value when you're 40, is different than what you value when you're 60. What you value in your career may change over time. You may start off valuing money and then you may value flexibility. Like these values are like things that you're constantly negotiating, and you negotiate those values with everybody that you engage with. You're constantly having these energy exchanges of, we are negotiating our values and having this conversation of what we care about. We're both sort of in that space of shared values, right? But there's still a negotiation that happens there. And we both have to decide that we agree to that we agree that we're here together to have this conversation. So in that sense, I look at our value systems and how we activate them as how we really align ourselves into being authentic. Because a lot of people set their values aside. And that's if you're people pleasing, right? Well, you're putting everybody else's needs before your own, and then you're secretly getting angry, and you might not even know it, but you're becoming passive aggressive, and you're doing because that energy has to be honored, right? You have to honor if you value something and then you don't honor that value, that energy is going to flow out somewhere. It's going to show up, and it may show up by paralyzing you, or it may show up by triggering you, or in any other way. So, authenticity. Not everybody likes purple hair. It's okay. Somebody told me today they didn't like my purple hair. It's okay.
It's
They
okay.
don't have to have it.
You don't exactly.
They don't have to have
They
it,
should.
And this is, I had purple hair long before I became corporate mystic. I've always had purple hair. So, it's just one of those, that's authentically me. And when I decide I don't want it, guess what?
Then
I
you won't
won't
have
have
it.
it. And I won't
Yeah.
care.
And if people understood, the trigger is just an indicator, I think that they would do a lot better in the regulation of that dysregulating feeling. I just think that people they just think the other person or the thing is just irritating.
One of the things where we are so conditioned, and especially in the corporate space, is we're so conditioned into our head. We are very logic driven in corporate. Logos is our leader, right? We live by logos, and it is just so much so, and it is shocking to me how many times a person will literally say these words to me. They will literally say something like, "No, I don't have feelings," and I'll be like, "Stop. Let's back up that statement." And let's like talk yes, you do. And really what it comes down to is people are so out of touch with the
Mm-hmm.
physicality responses happening in their body
Mm-hmm.
when they feel angry and their gut tightens or their chest tightens or, their face turns red or whatever they do. And they're just so conditioned to push it down that over time they stop learning how to read those some signals at all.
Right.
And so they even confuse the emotions themselves. They may know they're having the emotions, but they're not exactly sure what they are, and they don't really know what to do with them. They're just sort
Yeah.
of like,
So what do you tell someone like that? What would you give me if I was a person that didn't know how to feel? What would be my first or second or third step to take to start feeling or observing my feelings again?
yeah, I would do some real guided, conscious visualization work.
Mhm.
We would start by learning how to just identify physicality feelings in our body, just
Yes.
the physicality of our body, and start in the very 3D space of where we are.
Yes.
And, do working with our breath, working with mindful concepts, not necessarily getting directly into meditation, but really just starting to raise awareness.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first place. It's not trying to change anything, not trying to no assignments. Let's just start looking at things, being observant, and trying to do that with as much objectivity as we can. Just with this,
Yeah, don't judge it.
as much yeah, without judging it. We're not going to judge this feeling that we're having. Let's name it. Let's name that weird feeling that comes up that's red, George. Okay, George is here. Oh my God, what are we going to do with George? But it's starting to just personify and humanize the fact that you're human and you have feelings. And over time, the goal is to integrate that and recognize how useful and powerful that energy is,
For
how
sure.
useful and powerful that information is. And in a leadership space, when you have so much coming at you from so many directions and you're really expected to be on and sort of aware of everything at once, that can only benefit you. That can only help you, to know how and when to respond, and even how and when to back off and take a beat and, give yourself the space you need to respond, which is
Right.
sometimes something that we struggle with. We feel like we have to be like automatic.
Right. Right. Yeah, they a lot of I think the old corporate world honors the fast response, the high productivity, the never sleeping because you're always answering an email. I don't think it's here anymore. I think it's kind of going away as, you know, um, things change and things shift.
Mhm.
But if you were to debunk any leadership concept, maybe leadership and holistic healing modality that goes together, what would be um, the biggest thing that I'd say people haven't quite got right yet? Like, let's debunk. I'm thinking of a topic, but I kind of want to just leave it open to where it's something that you encounter with people that you consistently have to kind of, I guess, redirect them.
That in order to be authoritative, you have to be an asshole.
There you go.
You don't.
Let's talk. Yeah.
You just simply don't. You can you can hold authority and empathy in the same space.
What does that look like?
And yeah, I think that as a leader, the biggest thing a leader can do for their team is to be connected into the space that their team is in so that the experience is shared, and to build that space of psychological safety and trust. And so when a leader takes the time to do that, when a leader takes the time to build that psychological safety with their team, when they actually understand the needs of their team, understand, even as simple like, how does my team best receive feedback? What are the best ways for me to, these things, they engender trust, they engender the capacity for that leader to express authority and for it to be received.
Right.
Because they've developed and created the space and the respect that allows that authority to happen, and the leader doesn't have to express that in some demeaning or diminutive way. And that doesn't mean also, because I'm a strong believer, I mean, as a leader, I've said, yeah, I need you to do this. Like, this has to, there are times that you have to make demands or that things, but I've also like followed it immediately with, I will be accountable. Like, take care of what, you take care of this. I'll be accountable for anything that comes back. I have your back. I will
Right.
support you.
Right.
If you need something to get it done, let me know what it is. I will make sure that you have the resources. It's not just, I need you to do this. Now go away. Right. Like, and I don't, I don't have any time for you, and I'm not here to mentor you, and I don't need your questions and all it. I mean, it's just the difference between being present and being available. And leaders are stretched then, I mean, they really are. But I think organizationally, we really have to look at what is sustainable and where do we find balance? Because going back to that high performance of like, high performance all the time on, I think that we're moving into a phase of whole performance.
Yes.
Right. Where we're bringing our whole selves. We're recognizing the value that we get massive amounts more productivity out of somebody who is healthy and happy and maybe spending less time focused on business, but doing so much more when they're there.
100%.
We have the capacity to make those changes. We have to get out of fear space and really into an innovation mindset and a curiosity space and willingness.
Right. Right. And I wanted to go into a little bit more of the concept of support. I think that, as a millennial myself, we may not have gotten the support that we're currently getting, which is beautiful. But I think some of my millennial counterparts forget what support looks like and how to support their team, either because they don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want to think it's just that they don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
So what is support to you? What does support mean in a leadership role? How can a leader support their team? What does that sound like instead of what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and these were things that I did leading teams.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always important to me. Like, I don't make. First of all, the first thing I usually tell somebody who works for me is if I have to manage you, I'll probably fire you. Okay, like I honestly, like we're
100%.
we're all adults here. I assume that you know how to manage your own time. You understand how to get the job done, and I've hired you because you're the expert at what you do.
Yep.
And it's like so that's something right out of the gate that is giving people sort of the autonomy to be the people you hired them to be.
Right.
And that's kind of coupled with understanding what that is, like making sure that you're connecting with people a lot of times what happens is, people, we put a lot of energy into hiring people. We do all the recruiting, all the interviewing, all this, all this attention. And then like, boom, here's your computer, here's your job, go to work. And then I talk to people who have never had a one-on-one.
Yes.
Have literally never sat in front of their boss and had a conversation. And if they do, it's usually just a download.
Right.
There's never, and leaders could simply be supporting their team by just talking to them and getting to know them as humans, understanding what their needs are. I talk, like, there's a lot of studies out there right now, and especially with Gen Z, this is going to happen. Okay, this is like corporations. It's going to happen. Gen Z is going to shift the way that we do business. And one of the number one things that comes up on almost every study out there is flexibility is what will drive business in the future, right? Flexibility. And it has to, right? As a coach, right now, my clients are currently in Hong Kong, Germany, Canada, the US, and I'm hoping to work with someone in Mexico. And it's like flexibility is critical to my job, right? And there's no reason why companies can't be flexible. And I like to say, companies can't be flexible at everything, but all companies can be flexible at some things. And companies need to start looking at where they can flex. Where can they flex for their employees? Does it have to be like everybody shows up at the dot on, at 9 a.m. and everybody leaves at the dot, and it's unfair if everybody, if you're a minute late or a minute off or whatever. It's like that type of micromanagement and that type of like process management is just, it's literally proving by dollars to be ineffective.
100%.
And so building flexibility into the process of leader is another way that you can support your employees, because people have different needs.
Right.
So just understanding what their needs are. Some people are trying to grow in their career. Some people just want stability and no stress. Some people are like, looking to thrive and like move forward. And it's like, I don't assume when I hire someone that they're going to be with me for the rest of their life, for 2 years, for 2 months. I don't assume that at all.
Right.
I believe we should start celebrating when people leave and move on. I can't stand the environment that like you turn in your resignation and then you're disappeared on a Friday. It's like we never see Jane again. Bye, she's gone. It's like, why don't we, celebrate when people make choices to grow in their own life instead of being resentful and fearful? What does that do to the culture? How does that impact the people around you? I'd rather throw parties for Jane all week long. Like, let's, yay,
all
Jane.
week long.
Go.
Good for you.
Yeah. Good. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Say good things about us,
Right.
Like,
right.
And it's just it's just a mindset. It's like, where's the flexibility? Where can you be flexible?
Yeah. Yeah. Gen Z, they definitely don't mind working weekends. And that's something that growing up, it was Monday through Friday, living for the weekend. And you have a very good point at Gen Z's wanting to flex because they want to do what they want to do when they kind of want to do it, and they want to earn money and do business. It's, there's this misconception that they don't want to work, and I don't agree with that one bit. I see them working. They want to work. They just want to flex.
It's actually, I'll pitch right now. Any leaders who don't know how to work with Gen Z, I'm happy to work with you to help you understand that they are quite talented and well worth the effort and attention to learn how to work. The generational divides that we have, I think, again, I'm always looking for how do we integrate? How do we collaborate? How do we bring together? It's fine that we've got distinctions. I love being unique, but it's like, I also love to connect.
Right.
And, I like harmony. I'm a Libra. I'm sorry. I love harmony. What am I going to do?
Yeah, I'm with you. I love inclusivity, and I don't think anybody needs to be left out of the party. I think everybody should be invited, and everybody just dance their own dance, So I feel you on that 100%. If there were 3 things, let's do 3. If there were 3 things you say a leader must have to be at least a decent or a good leader, what would they be?
They have to have self-awareness.
Characteristics.
Yeah, they have to have self-awareness. I mean, they simply have to understand who they are and how they show up. They have to have integrity. I mean, just follow through, do what they say, be the person they say they are, And I guess to me, integrity and authenticity are sort of equal. Like, because if you're one, you're the other. It's sort of goes together. I think good leaders need to just have a sense of humanity, honestly. Like they just have to recognize that they're working with people. And it's something that is value add to the job. It's a value add skill to show up that way. And, I mean, I can think of probably 100 skill sets, but I think if you're not there treating humans like humans, and if you're not there with integrity, and if you don't know who you are, you probably shouldn't be a leader, like you probably shouldn't be in that role.
Yeah.
There was a study that showed that managers do have an impact. I think it was like 69% of employees studied, and this was across 10 countries and over 3,500 people interviewed, said that their managers had more of a negative or direct effect on their life than any other aspect of their life, including their partner, their doctor, their anybody. That we don't realize the amount of influence we have as bosses when we control their livelihood, we control the hours of their day and whether or not they're going to pay their mortgage. And, we also influence the energy that they take home with them into their home lives. And so, it affects their health, their mental health, and there's accountability there. So I guess if I was going to add a fourth thing to the leader thing, I would say accountability. Like leaders need to be recognized that they need to be accountable for what they're doing. It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, I don't think that leaders quite understand how impactful they are just yet. I think intentional leadership is sort of missing because they think that they're just doing the overall job and herding the sheep, and that's not at all what you're doing. There's so much more behind it, and if you're not careful, it can go south very quickly for people.
Absolutely.
And
I've definitely seen real breakdowns happen.
Right. Thank you for calling it out.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I talk about corporate traumatic stress disorder, and again, I don't mean it jokingly. It's like people really have gone through some, their doctor. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabor-Mate, but he wrote The Myth of Normal, and in that book, he talks about big T trauma, which is what most of us are familiar with, which is like wars and assault, violent crime, things like that. But then he talks about little T traumas, which are just like small, tiny traumas that they have an exponential buildup over time. And they do create sort of a breaking point. And that's, I think, what we often experience in corporate spaces. There's a lot of that sort of little T trauma stress where
like a little needle.
Yeah. There are times when it can be too much. And I think that there are healthy environments out there. I don't think that like all corporate is bad. I think, and to your point, you comment you made earlier, it's like, I think most people really do have good intentions. I think most people want to show up well, but we haven't given them the right resources. We've sort of gotten into a cycle of poor leadership where we've had poor leaders developing poor leaders. And so it's like, there's just got to be a break there.
Yeah.
Where we come in and say, hey, it's okay if we all take a look at this and start over. Okay, it's okay.
Right. So last question for me. I believe that skills can be taught, but I've often heard more recently that the soft skills, the human skills, the people skills cannot. I don't necessarily agree, but I would love your viewpoint.
Oh, I think that the soft skills can absolutely be taught.
Right.
Like absolutely be taught. But there's some things that have to be in place for that to happen. And I think it's important to understand the distinction. I'm a coach and I absolutely work with people to elevate their soft skills. Right. And what elevating soft skills can look like is, for example, sometimes lowering the hard ones. Okay, so elevating a soft skill of empathy might mean taking down a hard skill of authority, and like kind of finding that balance, right, in that space. And so it is really just teaching people to work with emotions. It requires willingness. Period. It requires willingness. If somebody doesn't want to see, and if they're not, our egos, which are very important to us. Yes. Okay. We don't want to harm our egos because they keep us alive. They are
Right.
there to keep us alive. But when our egos are in survival mode,
Mhm.
right, they're out of control. And we want to be in thrive mode, right?
Yep.
We want to be in that space where we're working from higher self, where we're
Hmm.
fully integrated. We're pulling from our mind. We're pulling from our heart. We know what our gut says. Everything's involved. And our ego's just making us look good. Okay, that's it. That's all the ego's there for. It's like, we don't need the ego solving these big problems for us and getting into fights for us, because the
Right.
ego is certainly going to create problems if that's happening. And that's usually what stops us from growth. Is the ego gets involved and says, hey, wait a minute, you're about to change everything I'm comfortable with. No, that's not going to work. We might die.
Yeah.
So we're not going to grow. We're not going to change. And that's kind of that shadow. That's that blind spot and that's, one reason why shadow work really honestly can't be done alone, because you're never going to work around your own ego. Your
Mm.
ego is always going to stop you, and you're not going to know it. You're just going to be stuck in that spot. You need that objectivity of somebody else going, hey, I think maybe your ego's like protecting you there. Like, is that a defense mechanism that's showing up? So I absolutely think that anybody can learn soft skills if they have that capacity and willingness. And
Sure.
I also think it's important, because we talked about trauma a little bit. If somebody needs therapy, that is very different than needing coaching.
Right.
And, I often, if I'm working with somebody who comes to me wanting to develop emotional intelligence, if I assess like, hey, maybe you might want to work with a therapist first, because you need to kind of deal with some more, issues that are like really preventing you from living your fullest life, as opposed to just making you feel stuck. And there's a little bit of a difference there. And so it's important to understand that and to be able to negotiate that as well.
Yeah, I think that's super important, because oftentimes as coaches, we find ourselves, in a therapy session, and I've got nothing, I know my stuff, but I don't know how to guide you through. And I think I think there should be, do you have something possibly on your website that has two clear distinctions of when you need coaching and when you need therapy?
That is actually, I might.
I
Like,
think that
yes,
would be super
yes,
cool.
I do talk a little bit about that on my website. And I do actually have documentation on that I can send it like a
I
client
would
or
love
somebody.
I would
Yeah.
love
Uh,
to
I
see
can,
that.
I can definitely share that with you. It
Thank
really
you.
comes down to when you're dealing with something that's truly pathological. Like, it's like you
Right.
literally can't function in your life.
Right.
And you're going to need to work with a therapist at that point, because you're dealing with patterns that are just incredibly deep
Yeah.
and may even require, more support than what a coach can typically offer. And
Yeah.
so, that's, I look at the coaching, like from a coaching perspective, when I'm vetting a client and a client is vetting me, because it's a mutual
Yep.
process, there certainly needs to be a fit there. But it is something that I'm super mindful of very early in the process of looking
Very
for
cool.
it. And some of that is through questioning, and some of that is just through what they're projecting and the information they're giving me.
Right. Yeah. And the ego's tricky person, within you. It can allow you to think that it is letting you in the most subtle ways. It's not, and I think you're right about the objectivity and having somebody help you out with that, because,
And
and just questioning it.
it gets glorified so much in the corporate world. And I think that's something else, when you talk about like kind of things that we have to break through, or myths that we have, the myth of like the sort of egomaniac business leader that's, the Steve Jobs guy or the whatever, it's like, yeah, there are these like big egos out there, but they all have their own awarenesses and awakenings in their own spaces. And that doesn't have to be the way that you have to be. That doesn't have to, be the way that you have to show up. And,
Yeah.
I just feel like it's one of those things that is sort of mythologized in the corporate
Yes.
world, where really, honestly, most people's egos cause them more problems than, good. And when you learn to work with that and understand it, it elevates you in a way that, allows you to just become more responsive. And
Yeah.
I
I
think
do
that
find that
that's
people just copy what they think is success,
absolutely.
for success. And it's not even, like you said, that's how I feel like a lot of people lose themselves, in
It's
that.
why the Wolf of Wall Street, well, I know it's supposed to be a redemption movie, and it's a really good movie. I mean, it's super entertaining, but it just makes me so sad. Like, I just watch it and I'm just like, that's, because, honestly, there's so much toxicity and just like wrapped up into that movie. And I don't ever think about the main characters. What I think about when I watch that movie are all the people in the environment that you don't see that are having to tolerate that level of toxicity.
100%.
And like what that's doing to them. And like, again, they're taking that home. What does that do to our society? What does that do to us as well? It's just, I don't know. It just makes me feel kind of gross. Like, like I don't want that. I want to vibrate higher. I just do. I think that, we can all be in a space of success.
Agreed.
I don't think that I don't know. I believe there's enough pie for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, it's just abundance, right?
Yeah, it is abundance.
Yeah. So, Steph, final thoughts?
Well, first of all, this has been incredibly amazing. I love the show that you do. I love the leadership from the heart. That's really what it is about at this point, is getting out of our heads and into our heart space, right? And just making those real connections. And my biggest thought is start with yourself. People really need to start connecting with themselves, activating their own values, and really figuring out how they can be empowered in the space that they're in, and then go from there, because that creates more possibilities when you're empowered.
Amazing. Yes, I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I appreciate you being here. If people wanted to find you, where can they find you?
Well, I am on Instagram at corporate_mystic. I'm also on LinkedIn, Stephanie Crain. I have my own podcast called From Illumination to Innovation. And I have a book that will be coming out in August, and it's called Brand Shadow, Understanding and Overcoming Corporate Toxicity. So I am very excited about that.
Me too. I am super excited about this organizational shadow work that you invented. I'm just going to say that.
It's like I invented the Post-it note. Oh my God.
So cool. So different than anything else. I think it's something that's going to be, a thing. And I think it's going to be huge, and it can help a lot of people as long as they want to look.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
sure.
Yes, it does take courage. That is the truth. Thank you. This has been so fantastic, Romie. I honestly just thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you. I'll wrap it up. That's our episode of Leadership from the Heart. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for being here. And as always, you can always reach out to me at info@leadershipfromtheheart.co. That's info@leadershipfromtheheart.co. See you next time. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Leadership from the Heart. We hope that you've gained valuable tools and inspiration to transform your leadership approach and create lasting impact within your organization. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. Your feedback means the world to us, and it helps us reach more aspiring leaders like you. Remember, leadership is a journey, and it's one that we're all on together. So until next time, lead with purpose, lead with empathy, and lead from your heart. This is Romie Montpeirous signing off, reminding you that your leadership has the power to shape a brighter future for all.